The morning rush at Stratton Industries moved like clockwork. The glass tower gleamed under Seattle's pale sun, 30 floors of ambition and urgency. Executives strode to the marble lobby, assistants juggled coffee and tablets, and security nodded at familiar faces. Below ground, where fluorescent lights buzzed and the air smelled of disinfectant, Elias Turner pushed a maintenance cart down a quiet corridor. He was 36, tall, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes shadowed by loss. His janitor's uniform was clean but faded, his hands calloused from long hours. Once, he'd been a biomedical technician with a promising career. Then cancer took his wife, and the life he'd built collapsed. Now, he worked nights and raised a 7-year-old daughter, Callie, alone, making sure she never saw how tired he was. At 8:47 a.m., the building flickered. Lights dimmed, screens went black, then blinked back to life. Most ignored it, except Elias, from the service corridor. He heard a faint thump and the whine of machinery. One elevator had jammed between floors. Smoke curled through the narrow door seam. Pressing his ear to the metal, he heard a faint voice crying for help. He didn't hesitate. Training and instinct took over. He forced open the access panel and saw the car stop just below floor level. Inside, slumped against a mirrored wall, was Serafina Caldwell, the 34-year-old CEO of Stratton Industries. Her blonde hair spilled across her shoulder, her red dress torn at the hem. She was unconscious and pregnant. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt circuits. Elias squeezed through the gap, checked her pulse, and spoke softly, trying to keep her conscious. The fetal monitor on her wrist beeped erratically. With quick precision, he stabilized her position, called for paramedics, and kept her awake until the fire team pried the doors open. As they lifted her onto a stretcher, Serafina's fingers closed around his wrist. Her eyes, glassy but aware, locked on his. Cameras flashed. Someone was recording. For a moment, beneath the chaos, something passed between them neither could name. Stratton Industries was a world split in two, gleaming offices above, concrete tunnels below. Elias existed between them, invisible yet essential. He left Callie with her elderly neighbor each night, took the bus from Tacoma, and clocked in unseen. Serafina lived in the gleaming world above. A Stanford graduate with a Wharton MBA, she becomes CEO after stabilizing a volatile merger. Brilliant and composed, she hid her pregnancy beneath tailored blazers. Her fiancé, Clinton Marlowe, had left 6 months before her IVF procedure. She decided to raise the baby alone, unaware that her greatest threat wasn't personal scandal but corporate betrayal. That betrayal wore a silver suit. Damon Croswell, the CFO, had once been promised her job. Sharp, cold, and patient, he'd been waiting for her to fail. Weeks earlier, he'd approved a routine bypass of a safety sensor, the same one that could have prevented the elevator malfunction. He buried it in paperwork, confident no one would notice. After the rescue, his chance came. The next morning, Elias was called to HR. Beatrix Collins, the HR director, read from a printed letter. Unauthorized entry, breach of safety protocol. Termination effective immediately. Damon stood behind her, arms folded, a faint smirk on his face. Elias didn't argue. He simply packed a spare uniform, thermos, and Callie's photo into a cardboard box and walked out through the lobby. No one met his eyes. Outside, the winter air bit through his jacket. He stood alone, wondering how to tell his daughter he'd lost his job for saving someone's life. Inside, Serafina sat pale and trembling in her corner office. Released from the hospital that morning, she ignored the doctor's order to rest. She replayed the CCTV footage again and again, Elias forcing open the doors, kneeling beside her, speaking calmly through the smoke. Then she saw the moment he was escorted out, box in hand. She reached for her phone to call him back, but a knock interrupted her. The board needed her for a merger meeting. She told herself she'd fix it later. By evening, the corporate narrative had shifted. An internal memo, drafted by Damon's office, labeled the elevator malfunction, an incident caused by unauthorized maintenance access. The janitor was reckless, a liability. By the next day, that story hit the internet. Grainy video, Clickbait caption. Stratton janitor fired after CEO rescue. Public opinion split. Some call him a hero, others bought the company line. Serafina received anonymous threats, distorted voices warning her to stay silent, encrypted emails telling her to let it go. Elias, meanwhile, hid his termination notice in a drawer. When Callie asked why he was home early, he smiled and said he'd taken a few days off. They went to the park. He didn't tell her about the unpaid bills or how close they were to losing everything. That night, he saw his blurred face online, reckless janitor, liability case. He closed the laptop and stared at the wall, feeling smaller than ever. 1 week later, a black sedan pulled into a weathered apartment complex in Tacoma. Serafina stepped out in jeans and a sweater, her hood pulled low. She'd never been to this part of the city. She followed the address on the employee file to apartment 212, where a small girl with curls sat fixing a toy car. "Does Elias Turner live here?" she asked. The girl nodded and called for her father. Elias appeared, confused but cautious. He recognized her instantly, different outside the boardroom, almost fragile. She tried to thank him, to hand him an envelope with cash. But he refused. "I don't want your money," he said quietly. "Just tell the truth." Before she could answer, headlights swept across the lot. A tinted SUV parked nearby. A camera flashed. Someone was watching. Elias instinctively stepped in front of her. The realization hit them both. This wasn't just a corporate cover-up. It was surveillance, threats, control. Serafina asked him to meet her privately the next morning. She said she owed him more than thanks. She needed his help. In a sealed conference room the next day, she laid maintenance logs across the table. Elias scanned them, his finger tracing rows of approvals. There was a bypass authorization signed by Damon Croswell, disabling the EB-14 sensor, the very fail-safe that could have prevented the elevator jam. Serafina went pale. Elias explained the truth. The malfunction wasn't an accident. It was negligence disguised as efficiency. Serafina called Constance Lee, her legal counsel, a sharp, silver-haired attorney with no tolerance for corruption. Constance listened, took notes, and asked one question. "If we pursue this, we're accusing the CFO of criminal negligence. The board will retaliate. Are you ready for that?" Serafina didn't hesitate. Yes. They formed a quiet alliance. Serafina providing access, Elias decoding the technical data, and Constance building a case. Late one night, exhaustion hit Serafina hard. She swayed, and Elias caught her before she fell. Dr. Louisa Penn, her obstetrician, was called in. "You're working yourself into early labor," she warned. "Rest or you'll lose the baby." After she left, Elias stayed behind, making tea the way he used to for his wife during chemo. They talked quietly about Callie, about loss, about loneliness. For a few minutes, CEO and janitor vanished. They were just two people trying to survive. That night, Callie left a voicemail singing a lullaby for Miss Serafina's baby. Off-key but heartfelt, Elias played it for her. Serafina laughed softly, the first time in months. Constance filed whistleblower motions. Damon retaliated with press leaks, calling Serafina unstable and distracted. She fought back by reinstating Elias as a safety consultant, granting him access again to the building's internal systems. The board noticed. Damon's composure began to crack. Then things turned dangerous. Elias's apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, just a warning. He sent Callie to stay with his friend Ronnie. "I have to fix something big," he told her. Something wrong. Weeks later, Dr. Penn called Serafina for a routine ultrasound, and everything changed. The test results showed genetic anomalies. The donor records listed Clinton Marlowe, but the DNA didn't match. Dr. Penn reviewed the files again. The donor sample was from a research study conducted 3 years ago under the name Elias Turner. Serafina froze. The baby she carried wasn't Clinton's. It wasn't a random donor's. It was Elias's. The IVF lab, owned by Stratton's medical division, had used his genetic material without consent. Whether by mistake or deliberate cover-up, it tied their fates forever. Serafina sat frozen in the dim light of Dr. Penn's office, her pulse echoing in her ears. "Elias Turner," she whispered, staring at the donor file. Dr. Penn nodded gravely. "It appears his samples were part of a cryo research archive Stratton acquired before your IVF cycle. His consent documents were never properly transferred. This is a violation of every ethical code in medicine." Serafina's mind reeled. The man who'd saved her life, the one who'd lost everything for doing the right thing, was the biological father of her unborn child. She felt shock, confusion, and beneath it, an unshakable sense of destiny. That night, she called Elias to meet her in private. When he arrived, she didn't know how to begin. "There's something I need to show you," she said quietly, handing him the file. He scanned it once, then twice, his face tightening as comprehension dawned. "This can't be real," he murmured. "They used my DNA without permission?" She nodded, tears glimmering. "You didn't just save my life, Elias. You gave it to someone else before you even knew." Silence hung between them, thick with shock and meaning. Then softly Elias said, "That child, he's mine." Serafina corrected him gently. "Ours." They sat there a long time, two lives forever intertwined by science and circumstance. Neither knew whether to curse fate or thank it, but the revelation made them dangerous. Damon Crosswell now faced potential exposure, not only for the elevator cover-up, but for the illegal genetic transfers made under his division's budget. He struck first. At 2 a.m., Serafina's car was forced off the road outside the city. The impact deployed her airbags. She survived with minor injuries. But the message was clear. Elias arrived at the hospital pale with fury. "They're trying to silence you," he said. "They won't," she answered, gripping his hand. "Not now. Not ever." Together, they went to Constance. The lawyer moved quickly, compiling the proof: bypass authorizations, medical fraud, falsified billing. She warned them, "Once we file this, there's no turning back. You'll make enemies who don't forgive." Elias glanced at Serafina. She's already been fighting alone. She's not alone anymore. The day of the board hearing came like a storm. Cameras lined the marble lobby. News outlets speculated on scandal. Inside the glass-walled conference hall, Damon stood at the head of the table, pretending calm. The directors whispered behind their tablets, expecting a routine dismissal. Serafina entered, steady despite her limp. Elias followed, carrying a folder thick with documents. Damon's smirk faltered. "He's not authorized to be here. He's my consultant," she said evenly, "and the father of my child." The room fell silent. Before Damon could react, Constance laid out the evidence: internal safety overrides, falsified maintenance orders, and a trail of invoices linking the lab's genetic fraud directly to his accounts. Every file time-stamped, every signature authenticated. Serafina's voice never wavered. "You endangered lives for profit. You sabotaged my credibility, used an employee's DNA without consent, and tried to erase the man who saved me." When she finished, she placed a final photo on the table. CCTV footage of Damon's assistant planting corrupted data in Elias's workstation. The truth was undeniable. The chairman turned to Damon, expression grim. "You're suspended pending criminal investigation." Security escorted him out as reporters snapped photos. For the first time in years, Serafina breathed freely. But victory came at a cost. The media storm was relentless. Headlines speculating about the CEO and her janitor, the unplanned heir. Some called it a scandal, others a miracle. Serafina ignored the noise. Elias, quieter but steady, stood by her through it all. One night, after another exhausting press meeting, she whispered, "You could walk away from this. You'd have every reason to." He smiled softly. "And miss meeting my son before he's born?" It was the first time she'd seen him smile fully, unburdened, real. Months passed. Serafina stepped down as CEO to rebuild her health and her peace. The board, fearful of public outrage, settled all lawsuits and created a fund for ethics reform. Damon was indicted on multiple charges. Elias declined any settlement money. Instead, he asked for something else. "A foundation," he said, "in my wife's name, to help families like ours, those who lost someone but still believe in starting again. They called it the Clara Foundation, named after the woman Elias had loved and lost. Serafina funded it personally. She said it wasn't charity. It was closure. When her son was born, she named him Caleb Elias Caldwell Turner. Elias held the baby in his arms, tears catching in his beard. Callie stood beside him, grinning shyly. "Hi, baby brother," she signed. Serafina watched them, this patchwork family forged by accident, fire, and truth, and felt something she hadn't in years. Home. 6 months later, in a modest building in downtown Tacoma, the Clara Foundation opened its doors. Its mission was simple: support single parents, protect medical ethics, and ensure that no one's voice, no matter how small, was ever ignored. Elias became its operations director. Serafina chaired the board. On the wall hung a framed quote: "Some lives collide by accident. Others are meant to find each other through the wreckage." Outside, reporters gathered for the ribbon cutting. One asked, "Ms. Caldwell, what do you say to those who think you lost everything?" She smiled, glancing at Elias, who stood with Callie on his shoulders and baby Caleb in his arms. "I didn't lose anything," she said softly. "I found what matters." That night, after the cameras were gone, they stood on the foundation's rooftop. The city lights shimmered like quiet stars. Serafina leaned against him. "Do you ever think," she whispered, "how strange it is, all the things that had to go wrong to bring us here?" Elias nodded. "Maybe sometimes things break on purpose, so we can see what's been hiding underneath." Below them, Callie chased fireflies, signing words of joy into the twilight. And somewhere inside the glass tower that once symbolized everything falls, the last flickering Stratton logo dimmed, replaced by a new one: Clara Foundation, Hope Restored. The story that began with a broken elevator ended with a rebuilt life. Proof that even in silence, even in loss, truth will rise.